Hello everyone, this is GM Josh Friedel, and this is another entry into my Autopsy series. I've been away and busy with other stuff for quite a while, but I decided it was way too long to go without one of these videos. I'm gonna try to get back to doing it more regularly, probably, hopefully once or twice a month, something like this. I've been recording other video series and doing stuff like that, so basically those are my excuses. But in any case, I wanted to do one. I hadn't done one in a little bit, so I wanted to really, keep it up and hopefully keep you guys interested. So one of the events that recently concluded was actually the World Cup. And I actually had this video set up for a little while, but I got sidetracked. And in any case, I wanted to kind of show a sort of feature of the World Cup, one of the things it teaches us about chess that a lot of others don't. So one of the features of the World Cup is that you often have chess games that are where a specific result is really required. So for example, say if you've won one game in your mini match, for example, against another player, all you need to do is draw and you advance to the next round. So a draw is basically the equivalent of a win with either color. And those kind of situations don't occur as much as in other tournaments. Now, they do apply to the rest, like those of us who don't play in, because obviously knockouts are quite rare. But I would say it does apply to us in situations like, say, you're in the last round and you're trying to play for first place and a draw secures it. You could also have situations where a draw is basically the same as a loss. So, for example, if you lost the first round, and that's mostly what we're going to focus on, when a draw is the same as a loss, then you have to play a little bit differently, right, to try to secure the win. And this can happen, say, you're trailing by half a point and a draw gets you nothing, a win gets you money or first place or whatever you're going for, right? So in regular tournaments, obviously because the total score matters more, these situations aren't as cut and dry. Like, it's very rare a draw and a loss are completely equivalent. But if you're playing for first place, oftentimes these things happen. And it can happen in any section. It doesn't have to be GMs. It could be, playing for under 2200, under 1200. Like, it really doesn't matter. Now, obviously, trying to play for a draw or play for a win is hard enough even for the very best. But I would say that, for any player, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think, and one of the things I want to focus on is that I think one of the mistake people make more often than not is not that they don't try hard enough to win when they need, win when they absolutely have to, or draw when they absolutely have to. It's that they alter their play too much rather than not enough. And I wanted to give a few illustrations of this as the kind of the main part of the video. So really, I wanted to actually take you guys back to my one and only World Cup experience was in 2009 in Khanty-Mansiysk. And I was, about 25-50. I was paired with Wang Hao, who you guys might be familiar with, who at the time was 2708. Pretty soon he jumped even higher than this and was, 15, 20 in the world or so. So certainly a much stronger player than I, but obviously I was, at the time at least, I was young. I had ambitions, all this. But the first round is white. Where I was white, he just completely outprepared me. He prepared for a line which he thought was slightly dubious that I played, or at least gave black good chances. I actually had a novelty prepared, but he busted it over the board and basically beat me quite simply. So it was obvious I was kind of outclassed in this matchup, but at the same time, I still think that this particular game, not even the game, just what occurred is very instructional because it was something I remembered for a long time. And I think that it definitely has happened to lots of people, and this kind of thing can apply. So I was black and I had to win against a player, quite frankly, a lot stronger than I am. Now, these are very rare situations that you're going to end up, because again, if I draw, I still go home, right? And by the way, leaving Khanty-Mansiysk is not the worst thing in the world, but obviously I would like to stay at the World Cup, so I was faced with a problem. Like at the time, my repertoire was not very broad. I only play, like now I played some Sicilian, I've played some Caro, other things. But at the time I only played E45, but I did play an aggressive line called the Archangel, and I did have options. It wasn't like I didn't have options, but I would say that, having to beat a player of this strength is very difficult. So he could play anything. Like, that was one of the things. He's very hard to prepare for. He could play any opening under the sun. So he ends up choosing knight f3 first. And I bang out knight c6. So at the time I played lots of Chigorin. But I think I had actually prepared Sicilian against him in some lines, but I didn't want to play c5 on move 1 against knight f3, so it was kind of weird. So he actually ended up playing e4 here, which is quite funny. And I play e5. Believe it or not, this looks ridiculous, but I've had a lot of games like this. When I used to play, like, I don't play Chigorin so much anymore. My repertoire is a little bit more boring now. But, especially when I want to win, a Chigorin doesn't seem like a bad choice. So he ends up going for Lopez. And my guess would be, again, he didn't want to allow Sicilian, even though at the time I played it very rarely. I had one period where I played it, and maybe I was even planning to. I don't even remember, honestly. It was 10 years ago now. So, he plays bishop b5. And this is kind of where I'm like, okay, well, I can't play my normal thing. So I have to mix it up somehow and play a system that he wouldn't expect. So I played knight f6 and then castles bishop c5. Already, this is a very, very poor decision. Now, obviously, it's nothing to do with the line of these moves. I didn't play this system. I did not prepare this. So I'm playing a system which has its own features, is kind of complicated, and I know nothing about it. So regardless of which result I'm playing for, whether I'm trying to draw or win, this is not the way to do it. Now, you can play something over the board you haven't played. Like, I'm not saying that it's something you can never do, but I would say that to choose something in a situation like this against, again, a stronger player and who, I need to have some kind of knowledge to try to compete with him in most positions, right? And honestly, this is just a completely stupid decision. So the line I played at the time mostly was the Archangel. So I would play a6. And again, I assumed he prepared for this, which is why I didn't do it. But it's still a sharp system, which I might as well do. So it would go like this. I play knight f6. Usually they castle, or d3, of course. And then this system, and it's very sharp. There are lots of forced draws, which is one of the reasons I avoided it. But I still should just do it. I mean, that's the system I played. It's a sharp system. And I also completely failed to kind of take into account his point of view, which is that he's white against a player 150 points lower than him, who he's quite a bit stronger than. Why would he want to draw? Even though it's, like there are some players who are pragmatic, who are like, even if they're playing down 150 points on a World Cup, if a draw secures them a spot, they'll secure the draw, they'll play the forced drawing line. I would say Wang Hao, and I should have known this, is just not that kind of player. He'd just want to beat me, right? And a lot of players would, and the fact is that I still have to make him prove it. So the idea that I had to play some completely different system. Now, I had some vague knowledge of this system, but it wasn't a system I had regularly played. So he plays knight takes e5. And here I realized that, oh shoot, so the only line I actually knew went knight takes e4, queen e2, takes e5, takes e4, queen e7. And there are different options, but, white does something like this, you play knight c6. And I remembered this line and thought, oh, well, I'm never going to win this position. And let's face it, that might be true. It's a symmetrical endgame, where white actually, if anyone has a chance for advantage, this knight on c6 isn't very good against these pawns. But white's not fully developed yet. I mean, I would say it's not overly dangerous, but okay, the odds of winning this position are not great. But the fact is, it's still a position you can play. And it's not entirely clear he would go for this. There are other options. I also, instead of taking on e4, I have also the option of doing this. And the idea is that after d4, I can play a move like a6. And what's really funny is, after bishop a4, b5, we actually transpose to a line of the Archangel, which I've played. But I didn't know any of this. Obviously, white has other options. You can go back to e2, for example, and then black can take on e4, but it's a complicated game. Anything can happen. Oftentimes black will end up maybe up a pawn, but for compensation. But in any case, it's a perfectly legitimate way to play. But instead I decided, okay, well, I can't allow that endgame, so I have to castle. I'll get compensation somehow. So of course, rather than, take and be conservative with d3, he just takes and plays d4. And now I realize I'm just completely lost. I'm just down a pawn. Because I move my bishop, he plays knight out. I don't have compensation here. He has the center. If I play with d6, he can just take this pawn. So I just have absolutely no compensation. So just to show you what happened, I played rook e8, he played here. And I decided the only course of action was to try to force this knight away. He played his queen f3, which is kind of a nice idea. Takes. Rook e6, d5. And I have no choice but to enter this endgame. So rather than the symmetrical endgame, with even material, I am now in an endgame. Granted, I have the two bishops, but I am down 2 pawns. And this is kind of ridiculous, to be down 2 pawns on move 16. So rather than increase my chances by keeping the game complicated, I actually just made my life miserable, right? I'm just down 2 pawns in an endgame. So obviously this wasn't the intention, and I didn't mean to oversimplify what happened, but basically, I probably would have lost anyway, or I would have drawn anyway. Like, I'm not saying I would have beaten him, but I basically made my chances 0 by, number 1, playing an opening I had no idea what I was doing, and number 2, rather than just accepting an equal endgame or trying to find some other way, I just played castles like, oh, I'll get compensation, and then I just end up down 2 pawns. And sure enough, he did go on to win. He actually won he actually ended up like letting me queen a pawn very cruelly, only to queen his own pawn and checkmate me somehow. It was very funny. So anyway, I mean, to me, this was like a real learning experience that, okay, like, if you try to play a system you never ever play, if you try to do all this stuff you never do, and make these crazy decisions, it's just not a good way to play for any result. It's a good way to play for a loss, but it's not a good way to play for a draw or a win. So I would say that this is the mistake I see a lot. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with high-pressure situations, you're going to make more mistakes anyway. But I would say that trying to adapt too much, trying to change completely how you play, is just not a good way to play, because you forget that mostly the way you get good results is by playing good chess. So let me give you an example that reminded me of this game a little bit from the 2019 World Cup. So fast forward 10 years. So this was the first round. It was, I believe it was first round. It was Jeffrey Xiong, American player who ended up doing really, really well. And, he's 2,700 now, but he came close to making the semifinals. He ended up losing to Rajabov, but he had a really good tournament, and he played Igor Loosli. And so Jeffrey Xiong, even though he's obviously very young, is quite a mature player, I would say. Certainly way more mature than I was when I played 10 years ago, and I was still older than him, I think. Maybe by a few years, something like this. I should actually know this, but already like way more mature, probably more mature than now even. But okay, obviously we're looking at it from his opponent's point of view, because this is the person who things went wrong for. So we have this game between Xiong and Loosli, and to give you a background, in the first round where Jeffrey was black, he won. So Loosli was in the same situation I was in. And you'll see that he actually, at least in my opinion, makes the same mistake. So it's a French defense, and Xiong takes. So unlike in my game, it's kind of clear that Xiong is trying to play, not necessarily just for a draw, but it's trying to play extremely safe. And again, Wang Hao may have chosen to play that way also. Maybe he planned for that endgame or whatever. My guess would be he just wanted to beat me. I was like some fish. But in this case, Xiong is clearly playing very professionally and just trying to draw, which you do see that a lot in this tournament. Because again, people are trying to save energy. It's an exhausting tournament. So, takes, knight f3, bishop d6. So far it's fairly normal. Xiong does play c4, which looks like a combative move, but really, it's just making black, it helps develop the bishop to a good square if black takes. And if black declines to take, then you can play c5 and shoo the bishop away. So in reality, Jeffrey, notice how, in my opinion, he's approaching this the right way. He's playing very safe, but he knows what he's doing. He's playing c4 because he thinks it's objectively the best move, and c5 for the same reason, even if it makes the game technically less drawish. And in my opinion, this is a really great approach. You have to put a premium on playing good moves. Now, obviously, he didn't have to play with c4. He could have played very, very simply. But I don't think this is a bad approach. So Loosli plays bishop back to e7, bishop d3, castles, castles, b6, and Jeffrey plays here. So again, just kind of playing developing moves, defending his pawn. Again, the game could become more double-edged here. And to be honest, I don't think that it's a bad move at all for Loosli. Like, in this position, there are so many nice options. You can play takes on c5 and play knight a6, which is kind of a double-edged game. You can play just knight c6, just developing a piece. You can play bishop g4. You can play knight g4, trying to go after the e3 bishop to provoke white into taking on b6. And again, I'm not saying it's a good position for black or a bad position. I think it's still relatively normal, but not completely dry, especially considering it's an exchange Slav. So I don't think that Loosli's opening was so bad for him. Not that Jeffrey played it badly or anything like this. It's just, I would say this is definitely okay for him. But again, when people are under pressure, they have to win. They just, in my opinion, especially with black, like, it's really hard to win with black on demand against a very strong player. But this can apply even in your own games. Let's say, no matter who you're playing, if they're around your strength or stronger than you, and you have to beat them from not like a position where you have a good chance to press, but just a regular position, it's just really hard because you feel like you're just under pressure the whole time. But what you have to remember is that you have to play chess, first and foremost. And this position is very complicated, but it's still very simple. You either have to play a concrete move like knight g4 going after the bishop, which makes a direct threat, to try to loosen the pawn somehow. Or play a developing move, like you take on c5 and play knight a6, you play knight c6, these bishop g4, these are all developing, improving moves. And that clearly improve their position. So black chose none of these things. Black just plays a5 and says, I don't have to develop, I'm just going to try to play knight a6 next move, I'm going to try to make things tricky. And this is one of the key words of death, I think, when you're playing. You want to keep the game tricky. But keep in mind that, again, everyone has different opinion on this, but I'm very strongly in the camp of strong moves are what put pressure on your opponent. That's how you're going to turn things around. And in my opinion, this move is actually just not very good. And the main reason is because it's a position that's relatively open, and this move develops nothing. Keep in mind, white's developed a piece pretty much with every move, apart from c4, c5. And keep in mind, c5 gained a tempo on the bishop, forced the bishop to a worse square. So it's not like it was losing time. And you're black. You cannot afford to fall this far behind in development when the board is this open. When it's a closed position, sometimes it's different. And I think this is a mistake that Loosli would never make. He's a 2600 GM. I mean, he's a strong, strong player. This is not a mistake that he would ever make if he were in a normal situation. In the same way that I would not normally play some crazy opening that I never play. Not that it's that crazy, but okay. And then blunder a pawn in the opening. I mean, you could argue I wasn't very bright for 2550, but at the same time, I wasn't quite that loose in the head. But again, these situations make people do strange things. And I think it's still true regardless of what level you're at. Like, you're going to make decisions you wouldn't normally make. And I think this is an example. Because Jeffrey, very smartly, simply takes and plays knight c3 and says, okay, you have a weakness on b5 and I'm up in development. Great. So black plays bishop a6, which seems logical. And white simply plays knight e5. Prevents the knight from getting in the game. Life is good. So black plays h6. So you might ask, do I have a problem with this move? You bet I do. And it's for the same exact reason. It does not develop a piece. Now, you do have different options. You can try to play bishop b7 with the idea of knight c6. It's kind of lame. I probably, and I hate to do something like this, but I would probably just take, and I don't think trading these bishops was actually that amazing of an idea either, but play knight a6 and just say, look, if you want to play knight c6 and take my bishop, whatever, I'm getting my piece out, I'm going to get my queen out next. My position's not amazing, but I'm going to survive. And again, sometimes you'll notice when when your opponent has to just draw, they actually will play this position worse and not put as much pressure on you. Would Jeffrey do that? 2700 Jeffrey, who's been killing everyone? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure Loosli was not happy about his position here anyway, but this would probably have been a better try. but he doesn't develop, and Jeffrey, of course, improves a piece. So every move that black does not develop, his position gets worse. Notice how rook c1, if you compare it to h6, rook c1's loads more useful. It has to be a good couple of moves for white. And yet somehow, a player of Loosli's strength played h6. So again, I really think it's just these situations really wreak havoc with how people play chess. So again, I mean, it's just something to keep in mind. Like, you have to play good moves, or at least avoid playing bad ones. So playing slow moves in an open position is definitely something. So he takes and plays a4. Again, not a develop. Kind of understandable, just because he doesn't have that many great moves anyway. But any move, like rook a7, trying to play rook c7 someday, maybe. I mean, it's a very ugly. Knight a6, again, just allowing stuff is better. But here we are. Now a4, a3. So the problem here is actually that this pawn is now another weakness. So apart from not being developed, he has another weakness. So he plays bishop d6. Queen goes back to d1. So once again, Loosli is in a horrible, horrible situation. I mean, he doesn't have development. He has a pawn that's weak on a4. He just doesn't know what to do. So again, maybe a move like knight a6, just giving up the pawn and saying, look, I'm just going to play down a pawn. A move like rook e8 maybe was what I would choose, just trying to go after this knight somehow. So at least you force white to make a decision. Moves like f4, of course, are very committal, and you're at least happy to see a move that might backfire on your opponent. Taking on a4, very simply, it looks quite good because this pawn on b6 will be weak at the end. Again, this position, he's probably kind of busted. But he ends up playing knight e4. So now rather than take on a4, Jeffrey simply takes on d5, with the idea that if takes e5, you simply recapture. The knight's centralized, this guy's still not out, so Loosli just resigns. So rather than give himself winning chances, or even just, play a decent game and, leave with a draw, which, again, obviously a draw is basically the same as a loss from result-wise, but obviously you'd rather, play a decent game. So he made it even actually less far than I did. And the main reason, though, we were making the same mistake, at least in my opinion. You'd have to ask Loosli, obviously. Maybe he was sick this day. Maybe he was, I was going to say jet lag, but he lives in Russia, so maybe not. And not to provide excuses, but again, this is not a weak player who's making mistakes which are way below his level. And again, the reason it stems from the fact that you're playing for a result that's not natural. Like, trying to go crazy as black is just not a natural thing to do. And it's not something which, the chess game is designed to do. Like, as black, you often have to fend off an initiative first. You have to play kind of normally. But apart from just the color, I think that you want to make sure you don't break rules you don't do. Like, not developing any pieces, like playing moves like a5 and h6 when you can just develop a piece. It doesn't matter what result you're playing for. These are just bad decisions. Again, keep in mind, open position, lots of stuff going on. In my game, I just gave away a pawn. Like, why would I give away a pawn? Giving away a pawn does not help you win. So I think that what happens is people they try to be too practical. They try to do things like, okay, well, this is too simple. I have to keep the game complicated. Now, I didn't provide any examples in this particular video, but there are also plenty of examples where people just need to draw, and they either play way too safe and give their opponent lots of play, or they allow their opponent counterplay when they don't have to. There are still the same kind of bad decisions because you're playing for an unnatural result. Essentially, but just trying to draw, I would say, is a little less hazardous than having to win on demand, but at the same time, you can still make poor decisions. So if you can take anything away from this, it's that regardless of what result you need in a tournament, you have to play chess, meaning you have to develop your pieces, play stuff that you're comfortable with. Don't try to play something completely random, unless what you play just allows a forced draw, something like this. But for the most part, most things you can play like your normal self. There might be a few decisions in the game where, say, You have to avoid a completely even endgame if you have to win. You have to avoid you want to avoid lines which are too crazy if you just need to draw. There might be slight adjustments you make, but they are slight. If playing for a win, playing for a draw alters your play too much, you will simply play worse. And regardless of what result you're trying to get, you're going to have a harder time getting it. So it seems like a simple concept, but it's very hard to actually accomplish because people just treat these games differently. And again, for you, it could be different things. Like, obviously, knockout chess tournaments are not things most chess players get to play. But everyone's had a situation they're playing in the last round for some prize or for first place or something like this, and they have to either draw or win. And I think that this mistake is made all the time. So it's just something to watch out for. Anyway, again, thank you for tuning into the video. I'll try to get back more on the regular with these things. But I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more. Thanks.